So what do you think happens more? Do you think people fire Siri by mistake, or they open iTunes by mistake? Which one happens more?
People have enough to complain about with Apple these days. Don't give them any more ammunition. I'm still an Apple fanboy. I know people hate.
I'm gonna get roasted for this, but I haven't had a problem with the keyboard, and I like the keyboard.
Wow. Thanks for costing us our entire audience.
Yeah, unsubscribed. I had to get files off my 2015 MacBook, the Retina MacBook. And I opened it up and I started typing on it, and it felt like I was using a typewriter. The keys were like just so big, and there's so much space. In the older model, there's so much space
in between the keys. You can put your fingers in between the keys and like let them rest there.
Yeah.
People are literally they're gonna like try to DDoS our site.
Don't worry,
because of this.
They just hit reload 4 times and
FastBoot crashes.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. When my keyboard does break, when I have the butterfly key problem, because that's what it is. The keys are just like this, where the old keys were.
Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Okay.
This is me trying to explain keyboards with fingers.
And they stick?
I think it's easier to break. I'm sure I will have the problem, and when I do, don't worry.
You'll complain.
I'll complain. Yeah.
I wonder also, we use external keyboards a lot, so
that is true.
A big part of it, because some of these people on Twitter who are just railing against it are like, first of all, they're like 16-year-old kids doing OSS with their MacBooks like 23 hours a day, and they're just like banging away at that thing. Who knows what they're doing on there? So maybe they weren't made for that. But no, I do like the computer. I liked my small version. I started out with the 13-inch and absolutely loved it. Never owned a 13-inch MacBook, and the form factor was amazing. It was so thin. I didn't even know it was in my backpack, which is huge walking around New York City, because it's just like any extra pound or two, especially in the summer on the subway, is just like crazy. Makes a difference. And that thing was awesome, but unfortunately the 13-inch ones still don't have a graphics card. They have an internal onboard graphics card, so it wasn't powerful enough once it was hooked up to like an external display. But the 15-inch is pretty good. They make the external GPUs now, so that would be interesting.
Yeah, I heard this was on like Hacker News or Mac Rumors, but them doing the external GPUs was like, people were saying, well, this is like an early version of them having a monitor with an external GPU. Like, the only reason that Apple would invest in these external GPUs is because they're gonna start building products with external GPUs.
Oh, really?
That was a rumor.
Interesting.
I looked. It was like, I think it was Mac Rumors or Hacker News, but everyone was like, "Yep, this is why." Like, the fact that they're building these external GPUs like into it's like OS level support for external GPUs.
Right.
And when when Apple does stuff like that, it usually is because there's
a
future product. Yeah, there's going to be a future product with a built-in external GPU. So imagine like a 5K display.
Well, that's the thing is, if you first hear that, you might be like, that doesn't make sense, because why should the monitor be responsible for the computing power or the graphics power? Like, it's a dumb terminal that a powerful thing should drive. Like, my powerful computer should just be able to output to any monitor, but the 5K does take a lot to drive. So it makes sense actually to couple the powerful hardware with it, because then you could plug in a lot of different computers and drive it, because that is where the 13-inch struggled.
So if Apple does come out with a monitor with a GPU inside of it, will you buy that and then go back to the 13-inch?
Of course I would.
Yeah. It's like $12,000 later.
Yeah, and also if you pay for half of it, then it's the beauty of having a business partner, right?
We should bring in more business partners.
Your financial irresponsible decisions get spread out. You get to socialize the costs.
Nice.
So we were hacking on some broccoli last week.
Yeah.
We made a new broccoli video for the site, and we were also trying to do some open source on Friday. Trying to work our way through Mirage issues, because there's kind of a game plan there. Fix some of the bugs and ship a 1.0, and there's a couple big features that would let us work on. but we were starting working on the Express integration, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Super exciting. It was fun working on it too because we got to do some refactoring of some parts of the code.
We should explain what this is and what this unlocks.
Right. So this is a couple things. It's funny how many things are overlapping here, but just off the top of my head, the first thing is when you develop with Mirage, you get local console.logs. And so that's for your network requests. Whereas in an Ember app, if you're developing against an actual like a Rails server or like an external API, you would see them in your network tab in your Chrome DevTools.
Yeah, this is because Mirage basically monkey patches XML HTTP requests. So when you make a request in Mirage, you never actually leave the browser. Just before it gets there, Pretender spits back the response. So
right.
it never
makes a network request. Yeah. So obviously that's part of the benefit of it. The whole point is that it can run your app in like an isolated environment, good for testing. That's why Pretender was created originally. But since Mirage has become a tool for like a development workflow as well, using the network tab in Chrome DevTools is a core part of a normal developer's workflow. So the fact that you don't get that when you're using Mirage sucks. So one way to solve this would be to use the Express server, the Node Express server that comes bundled with Ember CLI, and run your Mirage code in that. So then the next question is, how do you do that? So how do you do that?
How do you run the Mirage code in Ember CLI?
Right.
Well, okay. What I learned last week was...
Well, there's a bunch of different ways you could go about this. So someone had an open PR that basically added FastBoot as a dependency of Mirage for the purpose of running your Ember app that uses Mirage with like window Pretender to run it in a FastBoot environment in order to have the Mirage server running and responding to network requests somehow.
So the idea here is you would still run your Ember app on the client, but when it makes network requests, it'd be going to like a FastBoot instance inside
of an Ember app on the server.
On the side of the server, and that thing would generate the Mirage response.
Yeah, and I think I don't actually think it might have just been using FastBoot to kind of wire up the Ember app with the Ember dependencies, because, if you have an Ember app that can run Mirage, then you know what you need to run Mirage. And I think it was doing that in the server so that you could get at the Mirage code and Node stuff kind of in Node. But like FastBoot was what was wiring everything together.
Okay.
Because there are some parts of Mirage that use Ember code. And that was things like string helpers from Ember, inflections from Ember, a couple other things. Now, Mirage from the beginning was developed to be ignorant of the fact that it was serving requests to an Ember app. And so like when I first started Mirage, I decided to make just the object model, not use ember.object, even though you call .extend, you're not extending Ember objects. You don't have super and constructor and all that stuff, which at the time meant we are just copying like Backbone's extend module. Again, a goal would be to have it use ES6 classes these days. But that way you can just new up a Mirage server anywhere. But there's a few places where kind of Ember just happened to sneak in, over the years. And so I think that's what he was using FastBoot for. But at a high level, the idea is get it wired up the way it's wired up in an Ember app, and then you could instantiate it within the Express, the server side. Now, Ember CLI comes with, it's running Node when it's building and serving your app, but it also has an Express server wired up. And so Express is like this low-level kind of routing layer. It's a server layer for Node. And you can define routes, just like in Mirage. You can define like route handlers and responses. And so one of our approaches, one of the ideas is, if your Mirage config has a this.get to users, you go to Express and do this.get to users, and then you just kind of somehow copy the logic. You somehow take the logic from the Mirage route handler and invoke that route handler function from Express. So you would read the route handler config from Mirage and somehow kind of reset those routes up in Express, like route for route. But that would require and that requires the Mirage server to be instantiated with like its fake database and like its model layer and all that stuff. So you could read all that stuff. So that's kind of one route. Now I think where we're going to end up is instead of just copying route for route, just having something like a middleware layer in the Express stack that says every request is going to go through like the Mirage middleware layer, and that's going to ask Mirage. We can add an API to Mirage that says simulate a GET request to /users. It's like asking the servers, like let's say you new up a Mirage server with all of the config, then you can call like simulate request on it, just on the object, and then give it a route and a verb, HTTP verb, and then you can say it'll either respond with a response, let's say, or it'll be like undefined or throw an error if it doesn't have something defined. And that way, like the request could be handled by Mirage, or if not, like if it's passed through, it could just keep going, or something like that. So that's kind of inverting the API, whereas instead of like defining a route in Express that matches route for route, so you're defining all these routes in Express, you just have like one part of the middleware stack. When the request comes in, it just goes through the Mirage layer, and then maybe Mirage handles it, and then in which case it responds with the data, or it just goes on to like other layers, like proxies and stuff like that.
Very cool.
So I think, and the cool thing about this is if we add this kind of server.handle request or server.simulate request or something like that API that just takes a verb and a path and a request body, let's say. If we add that API to Mirage, now you really do have a lot more flexibility, because right now, you define a route like this.getUsers for Mirage, and like what's going to happen, I mean, it's very opaque. Like that's your API to Mirage. You put that route handler in a file, and then anytime there's an XML request, it's going to get handled. But like, again, this is a problem with fetch. Like fetch mocking doesn't work because all of that is assumed. The XML HTTP request is assumed. What if we wanted to use Mirage and Express? What if we want to use Mirage and a service worker? So using Mirage and a service worker actually gets you some of the benefits of both, where you're running your whole Ember app with its fake server in a single client environment. You don't need a server running. So you could put that as a demo, as a static app somewhere. You could run it in a test, but you would get the network requests, because if you get network requests that go from your browser, your current domain, to a service worker, it's actually crossing that boundary, and the browser treats it as an external network request. So if we had this handle request API in Mirage, you could call that anywhere. Anywhere you have an instance of a Mirage server, you could just call handle request and get the data. You could call like post to it and put data in it, and it would manage the database. You would be able to do like server.schema and get at the ORM, but it's just like this little thing. Basically, it becomes agnostic of who is handling the routing, like the actual server. At that point, it's not really a server instance in the sense that it's no longer, the way to access it is not with HTTP. It's like method calls.
So does this mean that someone could write like an adapter that you send like WebSocket requests to this thing, and then that
exactly another thought I had, because what people have done in the past is, let's say you write an Ember app with a backend and you're writing it just normal REST style. And so your Ember app makes an AJAX request and your server responds. And then you add WebSockets later. And a lot of times what people do is they have their server connect to WebSocket, and if there's an event they need to send to the client, they just take the event, and it's the same shape of data that it would have been if they were responding to an AJAX request, but they just send it over the socket.
Yep.
So the data transport's the same. Let's say they're using JSON API. Let's say they're going to push it into a named model in Ember Data Store. All that stuff is the same. And so people do that, and they want to test this WebSocket behavior, and you could use Mirage to do that. There's nothing out of the box that will kind of wire it up for you, but if you get basically a mock WebSocket layer in there, you can define, again, it's just like how Pretender lets you mock out XML HTTP requests. These mock socket libraries can let you mock out WebSockets in the browser. And so what you do is you new up a fake WebSocket, and then like on event, you can respond with whatever's in Mirage's database or something like that.
But this what you're talking about here, this Mirage 1.0 push, will give a clean API to that.
Exactly, because in the mock layer, all they would do is just say, like
request.
on event, server.handle request a get to slash posts. Whereas now they have to like dig into, you have to like schema.post.all, this dot serialize it, and like something like that. When what you really want to do is, what would happen if I sent a get request to my server? Something like that.
Yeah. Cool.
So pretty neat. It's like basically HTTP is like a great API if you have to do it. But, you know, I remember DHH talking about this when he was railing against services at one point. And he was like, people can complicate things because they force themselves to communicate over HTTP when they don't have to. And it's much easier to just send a message to an object than to use HTTP protocol when you don't have to.
Latency.
Yeah. And just the format, like if I have a server, I would love to just call server.handle request and get a JSON back instead of like a new XHR, you know what I mean? And like dot send and this, you know, all this stuff. So if you have the Mirage instance in wherever environment you're working, then you can just call handle request on it and get your data or manipulate the server data. But it's still nice because you're manipulating it in that constrained way. Like you still have the routes that you've defined.
You know, another thing is, this is something we've kind of talked about before, but you're also like, this is forcing you to kind of like make Mirage's boundary.
Yeah.
Like push it down a layer. So you're no longer handling like the HTTP requests. You now have like, it's now Mirage.handle request. Smaller core, you know, you can let people make add-ons. If someone wants to make like a WebSocket thing, someone can come along and now make this Mirage WebSocket.
Service worker.
So that kind of like opens up, you know, we talk about like, how do you get more people involved in projects? And this feels like a good way. It's not, they have a well-defined API on both sides really, on the WebSocket side and on the Mirage side. Right,
and if someone wants to make WebSocket support, they're not blocked by me.
Yeah.
Because Mirage is not trying to do everything. It's like a smaller thing, right?
I mean, that must feel pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see like if it would really, I mean, I guess the true test would be, can you make it as convenient as it is today, but get Pretender out of there so that we would use Pretender and we would use Pretender to define the route handlers, but all the logic of what happens when you hit a route would be like basically Mirage.handle request or something like that. And that way, if someone is using fetch, they don't have Pretender, they have fetch, but they can still install Mirage and say on fake fetch, use Mirage.handle request or the sockets or whatever. So yeah, that would be the real test if you could get something as convenient as that and basically abstract that part of it away. Or maybe there's an adapter pattern where you still have like your Mirage config that's like this.get, but like what does this.get mean? If you're in a browser typical environment, it means do this.get with Pretender. If you're in WebSocket, it means like this.onEvent. If you're in Express, it means this.whatever.
You know, it's weird. I can imagine like this.get working in Express and Pretender and Fetch, but with WebSocket, it's kind of like, what does this.get mean?
Yeah, I guess you would map a WebSocket event to a route handler. So if I'm going to send like a payload over and I have a naming scheme for my WebSockets, which is basically like creating a post, which is basically like post to slash post or something like that, then I can just say, I can delegate off to one of those existing route handlers. Because let's say your route handler has some logic in it, right? That's the idea. It's like, that's what your server's exposing. So that could be a possibility. But yeah, it's kind of like, you know, at Rails you have the router, but then you also have like the controller, which is where the logic lives, and then like active record with the schema stuff. And so like Mirage is kind of mirroring those pieces. But like if you can get the active record stuff, which is like I just need to work with the schema sometimes and test or whatever, and then like the controller part, which is really more like the route handlers.
Yep.
Like route handlers in Mirage are basically like controller methods in Rails.
Yep.
And then the routes file is this thing that needs to change. Like this routes file is like I want to mount these two other pieces in different environments.
Yep.
So it's kind of interesting thinking about how we might be able to do that.
Also, the other thing, this is moving closer towards, you know, you kind of talked about how Mirage was created for like the test environment and it ends up in development environment. And now it's an Express.
Yeah.
And, you know, pretty soon I'm going to be able to write my Mirage config and press a button and have that be my production server.
I mean, I've resisted that for a long time just because I wanted to make sure the focus that stayed on like developer experience. But it certainly would be nice. I think even if it's just like this is for toy apps, and like maybe one day it would be for like a subset of production apps, but like if you can get started with Ember and you can just Ember install Ember CLI Mirage, build your thing locally, and then you can just push, and that would be it. It would basically like, even if it used like an SQLite database or something in there, or it just...
See, I feel like that getting that deployed is like the big hurdle.
Yeah.
And then once you have that working, there's so many optimizations that can, in comparison, will be the foundation is getting it deployed.
Yeah, I really think, I mean, you definitely could do it though. I mean, it's just about...
Dude, it'd be so amazing. When I develop Ember apps, I do all the hard work in Mirage.
Yeah.
And then when I'm done,
it's just like a copy pasting.
Brain dead.
Yeah.
Just, okay, what did I do in Mirage? Okay, now I know how that maps to Rails.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's not, for the CRUD stuff, I use Mirage to like iron everything out. And then, yeah.
Yep. I think we should experiment with it for sure.
I think it would be so freaking cool.
I mean, honestly, especially as a teaching tool, to be able to push something and have just an Ember app that has persistence, and that was it. It's one repo, all your server logic is there.
Yep.
Your tests are running against your server, your actual server, basically. I mean, there's still some differences, but basically it is. Yeah, so that would be fun. I think all of this stuff. So the exciting thing about all this work is that it leads to all of these things.
All the paths, yeah.
Yeah, service worker, Express, WebSockets, deploys.
Can we run Mirage on the blockchain?
With handle requests, we might be able to.
Nice.
So as part of this work that we were doing, we were tinkering around with Broccoli because Mirage and all of its classes and all of the Ember stuff that it usually runs within run on the client. But to get all this stuff working, you want to basically require it in the nodes environment and new it up there. So addons, which Ember Mirage is an add-on, have a hook called server middleware, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's in index.js. And that gives you access to the Express server instance, which is running alongside Ember. And that's what takes care of like proxying, if you ever run like ember serve -- proxy, or if you create mocks using Ember CLI's generators. And
I mean, it's a thing that serves the index.html when you visit localhost 4200.
Right. And your tests, and it's doing all that work. So it's the actual web server behind what powers Ember CLI. So you have an opportunity to manipulate that either from your app, or add-ons can manipulate the host app's Express server. And this would be the path that Ember Mirage would take if it was going to make this work. So when we were fiddling around with this, that was kind of like at a high level, what are the steps we are trying to accomplish here? If I can go to Mirage's server middleware hook and I can, require all of the server code. And in Mirage, there's one file addon/server.js, which basically is the entry point. It's like the main file. And in the initializer that runs in the Ember environment, it imports that as an ES6 import and then news it. And basically, that's your server global. And it doesn't live in the container. It could, but it just never made it there. But that's how you get the instance of the Mirage server, which is what you interact with and test and everywhere. So that needs to happen in Node for that to happen. So in Node, we require instead of import, which means and that works with modules of a certain format, which is not what we're used to using as Ember developers. So you have an ES6 module that has import Ember, component from Ember/component, export default component.extend. That's what we write every day. In Node, it's common.js, which looks very different. And I know I didn't write any Node before getting into add-ons. And basically my Node experience comes from Ember CLI and Ember add-ons. So I don't have a really strong foundation there. But it's just a different format. You require, I'm sure people have seen that, where you require if you open up your Ember CLI build file, you'll see something where you require an Ember app. You can require Broccoli plugins and manipulate your build there. So ideally, you want to be able to basically require Mirage / addon / server.js, but you can't do that because it's not a common JS module; it's an ES6 module. So there's this library we were working with that John Dalton wrote. It's called ESM, and the idea is he's the author of Lodash, super popular module on NPM. It can take an ES6 class and turn it into a common JS class. So
Nice.
that way you can share the code. So the code is still needed. Well, if you were going to use it on the client, you still want it there. And we want to author an ES6, but to be able to consume it in Node in this format would be great. So ideally what you want to do at a high level, what you're trying to do is turn this thing into NPM common JS style modules, require it all, and then you have access to that code. You can run it like you need to. You actually call require, which like is the same as kind of importing it so that you can just new it up. And now you can just do new server, and now you have an instance of the Mirage server, and you can go to town.
You know, it's funny when you describe the steps, it's like, yeah, that's so easy. Like you're outlining every step. And I remember when we were doing this, it was just like all these little, like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
So the first problem we ran into was we didn't even know about ESM. And we didn't know about ESM until we posted on the Discuss forums and Ed Faulkner chimed in.
What were we were trying to
So
use
our first
roll up?
approach was this. So this is a thing where in Brock, so what happens is you run Ember serve and Broccoli is going to build your app. And that's when Node is doing all of its requires and all this stuff. So what our strategy is, okay, let's find a hook in the build process, like tree for app, tree for addon, tree for JS. And you want to use a Broccoli plugin to read the Mirage files off of disk and then use Broccoli to use rollup, a rollup Broccoli plugin which existed, to roll those things up and output them in the common JS format. So rollup does a similar thing to ESM in the sense that it can read in a graph of ES6 modules and then output it either as a single file or they can output it as like a common JS formatted file. So, but its main focus is to do that, roll up a bunch of ES6 modules using the static imports. So what we wanted to do was read those off of disk, use rollup, write them to a new location, such that when we got to the server middleware hook, they would be available inside of the build at that time. Now the Broccoli build moves through stages, and you write plugins that manipulate those trees, which are like those managed directories. You know, we talk about this in the series on EmberMap, but the idea is like, you can think of it as like a bunch of promises because all this stuff takes time. Now the hardest part that we ran into, just the hardest part about working with this stuff is the hooks themselves, understanding what hook is, what's for each hook. Also not being able to just like return a promise and do like .then. I mean, that's not the API, right? You have a tree for app. It takes a tree and then you can pass that tree to many Broccoli hooks and then return it. But the order in which the hooks run and what's available when is tough. It's not as simple as just like promises are great. Like if everything could be a .then and you can just see what happens next, it would have been simpler. But we were trying to guess which combination of two hooks would let us first do all of this work, read it in using rollup, and then second, read it in using rollup and write it using CommonJS. And then a later hook that would let us read it in from CommonJS using require and then new it up in that server hook.
Yeah.
And we were having trouble.
A later hook that was not like setting up the build, but a later hook that previous hook had built its files. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the areas where we were just...
So we were just trying to do different things and, you know, the PR where someone had basically put this together used some lower level Broccoli APIs where you create a builder around some location and you can call it builder.build.then. And that was kind of nice because you could actually imagine that being a nicer story for debugging and just understanding what's happening. But because the build process is kind of obfuscated behind a lot of the hooks and the hooks we don't understand them and the documentation is sparse there, it was tough.
Now if we were going down that road and we're using like Broccoli to build this roll-up thing, does that mean that like it's almost like building, like creating a broccoli inside of broccoli? Like, is there like an inception thing going on here where you're like creating a new broccoli?
Oh, the builder.build thing?
Yeah.
Well, that was what worried me about that approach, because I think the idea is you have everything you need in some of these input trees. Like, you have the input trees that are coming from the source of your app, and you can just read from like this.project.root, and you can just grab files from source, from root, from disk. And but you want to return them like using merge trees and merging trees together. And so the builder.build thing felt like it was going outside of that, so I didn't want to do that. That's why I wanted to figure out how to use it with taking a tree and returning one or many trees to get what we needed. But the weird thing was, and this is kind of what started making sense to me when I was thinking about it after we stopped, and after Ed's suggestion to use ESM, and that was that the reason you want to typically use Broccoli to take source files on disk and write out files on disk, right? Because that's how Broccoli works. Like, it writes things to an output path. And you want to do that because then they get bundled together and like shipped to the client. So you would run like your Ember components through Babel and end up with like AMD modules that are going to get concatenated and shipped to the client and required using require.js on the client. But in this case, we just wanted to read the Mirage source files, and so that we could use them in Node. So there was no real reason to ever write the transformed ones to disk, other than to get them again.
So you would like transform it and then kind of like eval that code, or
exactly require it. And that's exactly what basically Ed was suggesting with ESM, is that just wherever you need them, just read them there and require it all of that in one step.
So Rollups API is input files and then output files, or input files and a single output file. Mm-hmm. Is ESMs like input files and then actual JavaScript objects, like, or does it?
Yeah, okay. ESM tries to make actually that whole process transparent. So so you
can like require an ES6 file.
Yes. So you actually override require.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that is exactly what we want. We
right.
want to say, like, we know these Mirage files are on disk.
Yep.
They're just written in ES6. Please let us require them.
Yep, because I need them in Node memory. That's the difference. I want them in memory. Whereas, like, an Ember component, I just want the file so that the, like, uglifier and concatenator can do their thing on it.
And then serve it to the browser, yep. Where are you now with this?
So now, when I installed ESM and started trying this, basically requiring the server file, that root server file from Mirage, failed. And that's because there was other packages that it was depending on and things that files within Mirage were doing that were only going to work in a browser. So the first example was in an Ember add-on, you can say, in ES6, you can use relative imports and absolute imports. So you have server and you need to import has many from like association/has many. So you can import ./association/has many. And that'll use a relative path. But you can also use an absolute path. And we use that a lot of places in Mirage's source code for files deep in the tree that in the directory structure that we want to move around a lot. And it was annoying to use relative paths. I'm sure people have run into this, like
.. /..
Exactly. So especially in tests, we do that a lot. And so we would do just import from and then string ember.cli mirage /test/helper. So it's an absolute path, but it's starting with ember.cli mirage. So one of the big things that's different between the browser side and the require semantics and Node's require semantics with common JS modules is that you can't do an absolute path lookup from the current module. So if you're authoring a module called, my module, you can't import from my module /foo.js in Node. But in Ember, or in require.js, basically whatever environment that's at the end of the whole Ember.CLI build pipeline, which I think is just basically it's the same as require.js semantics. AMD, you can use the current package name as the beginning of an absolute path. So there's a couple places where we were importing from Ember.CLI mirage /some file, and we couldn't do that anymore. That was blowing up ESM. So what happens is you try to require Mirage server with ESM, and it says we can't find that path because and expect that thing to be a package, like a dependency.
Yep.
And it's going to look in Node modules, but it's actually the current project.
So basically with nodes resolver, you want to import from the current project relative URLs.
Yes.
You want to import from a dependency. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yep.
Is the answer to this you doing some like require hacks to like switch it, or are you just going to change Mirage to always use?
Yeah, I just went through and changed it, and fortunately, I only had to change the files under addon, and the biggest part where we were using the absolute lookup was in tests. So I didn't have to touch any of those, which was good because we don't need to run the tests when you're requiring the server instance in Node, right? So it actually wasn't that big of a deal. Like it was just changing 6 or 7 files, something like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing, basically I was just running into things that were like inconsistent and not working. By the way, I think the answer there is to just use relative paths for current modules just so that your ES6 modules can play nice in Node. Like that's just the semantics of Node for better or for worse right now. And so it's best to just do that so that you eliminate those differences between the environments. Then the next step that I'm still working through is like the stuff that's dependent from Ember. So like Mirage is using string helpers from Ember, like dasherize and underscore or camelize, all that stuff. And it's also using inflections, which is like how to pluralize or singularize things. And the string helpers like dasherize and camelize, there was some of those that I just used from Lodash because we already depend on Lodash, and there's a lot of that logic that's just taken care of. So I just switched those out, and I got the test passing there. And it's nice because I can go through and like make these changes and run Mirage's test suite, which is running in the browser, but that tells me that Mirage is going to work in the browser still. But once I get those changes made and I can require it in Node, then we can play around with it in Node. Yep. So it's kind of cool.
This is a situation where testing just pays off huge.
Oh my gosh, because all of the little ways that, if I'm changing from ember.string.plural, I already ran into this a few times, but like ember.string.camel case treats things differently than Lodash's camel case. So like you have to kind of write a new little wrapper function and make sure you're not breaking the API of that. Like it didn't actually, one of them removed slashes and the other one left it, something like that. So paths were screwed up for like children models, something like that. But we have tests for all that stuff, so that's really good. I couldn't imagine doing this without tests, obviously. It would be crazy. So the next thing is the inflection stuff, which is tough because that's actually a part where you do cross the boundary as an Ember developer. If you've customized your Ember data stuff to treat, plural of sheep as sheep, or something that the default stack doesn't know about.
Where I've run into this in the past with like media,
yeah,
and data, like data and datum.
Yeah. So if you want /datum or whatever, or the type in the JSON, basically if you're going to use a singular version, it's not irregular, and you configure it, then you want to do that, and you want like Mirage's shorthands to respect that, Ember data to respect that. And so now Node needs to know about that, but it's not going to be able to get that from the Ember environment because when you configure an Ember inflector, you're doing it in like app.js, right? Which is when your Ember app initialized on the client. But now all this Mirage stuff is running the server, so we're going to have to figure out some way there to share those rules.
Yeah, maybe like, you redefine them for Mirage. That sucks.
It'd be nice if there could just be like an inflections.js file that exports a Pojo, and then like anyone can use it. Something like that.
Yeah.
We could even there's a couple of things we could do. We could like somehow at build time run your Ember app and like read from the container and inspect what the inflections map is. Something like that. So we'll figure out something for that. The inflections map, but that's basically where we're at right now.
I've something I thought of, and I think goes nicely here. So in like every more complicated app I built using Mirage, I noticed that my Mirage config relies on browser JavaScript. So I maybe it's an example might be like importing jQuery and using Actually, I've never done that.
In your Mirage config?
But there was stuff I was looking at.
Like Ember helpers?
Yeah, that's a great one. Ember helpers, little like transforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe like using document create element A with like a ref to like parse the URL.
Right.
Like, just little things like that. But I have noticed that when we were doing this, I was looking through a bunch of Mirage configs and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to have to rethink that if this is going to run in Node.
Yes.
And so I wonder if part of this is also like, figure out a migration path when, if your Mirage config is a few hundred lines, you probably have some browser stuff in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's more like the stuff, even the stuff that I've been fixing. The Ember string stuff and the inflection stuff is one thing, but there's just stuff that was in Mirage that I've been removing that I wasn't aware of because I'm developing and testing Mirage in a browser environment.
Yeah.
So I absolutely think there's going to be stuff like that.
Another one, cookies. Like I have one app that inspects cookies and
document.cookie, exactly. Yep. So I think the answer there is going to be once we get it working, we'll have to do a build time check of your config. So if you opt in, and of course there's going to be this is not going to be something that just breaks everyone's Mirage apps. Like Mirage will continue to work in the browser. This will be something that people can opt into, say, I want to run Mirage in an Express environment. And maybe in the future it'll be a default, but there'll be options there. And it's still hard for a lot of people to have, one of the main reasons people used Mirage in the beginning was to run their test suite in their CI environment. So I still think even if we snapped our fingers and this was done, there's still plenty of valid use cases for running Mirage in the client, like mocking out Ajax XML HTTP requests.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just debugging is so much easier in the client.
Right.
Like having to use Node debugger and everything.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think what we'll do is once Mirage's source code works in Node and all of the normal Mirage APIs do, then we'll have to do like a try catch basically. And what we'll do is we'll try to require Mirage and then run the host apps config, read in the host apps model definitions, all of that stuff. And if something blows up, then it just won't pass the require step. And unless it happens at runtime, like it's at runtime and route handler,
exactly.
Like we'll just have to add good error handling there. Like, the Mirage middleware was handling this request and something happened. So that'll be something that folks will definitely have to go through, but that's just the nature of it. Like your Mirage server now needs to be able to run in multiple environments, so it's more constrained than it was before. But I think we can be helpful there. So, and the last benefit we didn't even mention was that you get to test your FastBoot apps.
Yeah. So this is one of the main things.
Yeah, it's one of the main things. So you start writing FastBoot and you just deploy it and it's literally basically untested. I mean, it's basically untested, right? I mean, you have tests for your Ember app and you're running your Ember app, but you're running it in such a different environment as we've seen, with our experience. Basically is another app and it's basically untested.
Yeah, what I've done in the past is I have a FastBoot test folder that spins up an Express app, builds the Ember app, loads that freshly built Ember app into a FastBoot instance, and then pings that with requests and checks the response. But it is only the Ember app. It is not sharing any testing stuff and Mirage.
Right.
And so I end up duplicating. First of all, I end up not wanting to duplicate code, so the tests I write are just super high level, just scratching the service.
Check.
Yeah, does the site not 500?
Right.
So it is I'm super excited for this.
Yeah. So this would be another benefit, even if you want to keep your development experience and your testing experience exactly the same. Being able to run your test suite against FastBoot would be awesome.
Yep.
And we should be able to make it so that I guess it would be a new suite of tests, right? Because your acceptance test suite
is testing behavior.
Yeah. In addition to initial render,
right.
Whereas the FastBoot test suite would just be initial render. So maybe there's if I'm thinking if we start going down this path with EmberMap, what we would do is probably have a folder under acceptance that would be initial renders or something like that. And it's just, rendering the initial page given I'm a subscriber, what does the homepage look like? Given I'm an anonymous user, what is this? And it's just a visit. It's just like setting up the data and visit. And then you could run those in Ember and you could run those in FastBoot.
Yeah. Yep.
So that would be pretty sweet. And you can just tell FastBoot test suite to just run everything under acceptance / initial page renders or whatever.
That's interesting. So that just clicked. So you would still run these tests on the client.
I guess if every request was being served by FastBoot, the Ember app does still do the initial render.
It does. It clears the page.
The thing. And one day it'll rehydrate.
Well, it does. There is, you can enable rehydration now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but still rehydration, you still want this test.
Right, you still want this test.
You still want to know that.
Yeah,
because the difference, remember, you're not going to run FastBoot if you click a link and see a page.
Right.
So you do want to know that Ember renders the same way FastBoot renders.
Right.
So this is that's interesting. That's a good test.
Yeah. It's just the initial render of my app works when FastBoot's trying to render it, and it works if/when the client's trying to render it. And it's just, you're just getting rid of the behavior because FastBoot never does any of that stuff. So
I imagine there won't be many of these tests.
No, I think it'll be like one for each route.
And having Mirage to help writing them, they'll be super simple. It's
super simple.
Create a blog post with a bunch of comments, visit the blog post page, and then assert that like these 3 test selectors show up.
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah. Yep.
Nice.
So, but that would give us so much more confidence. Imagine being able to change all that and having your FastBoot tests pass.
No, I enjoy deploying the app and then immediately going to the website to make sure everything works.
Looking at the Roku logs and just seeing, there's something's happening with Node there.
You gotta live, man. Come on.
So, yeah, just having talked through all this and having it taken us basically an hour here, there's a lot here, and it seems like it's a worthwhile effort, It seems like it's basically like, if you think about what's next most important in Mirage, or what would have the biggest impact on our development flow and possibly others, this is a big part of it.
Yeah. This plays nicely with like a bigger picture thing I've been thinking of, where it's like you want to write a template that you can render anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And JavaScript is kind of perfect for this, and being able to run your Ember app on the server or on the client and not really having to think about like where this thing is running, just writing a template is amazing.
It's huge.
And getting more stuff that can be run in both these environments. Yes. And I'm not talking about like this argument of like, oh, you want to use the same models everywhere.
Right.
Because you do have different concerns on the server and on the client. But I think templating is one where you want that to be portable.
Well, today I did a PR to EmberMap where you just curly if user is anonymous, say welcome to EmberMap in the homepage. And now that's going to end up in the cache. We're going to have 3 new versions of the cache. And you can open up the cache and look at the HTML response that FastBoot's going to be serving up. And it's just going to have that HTML there for anonymous people. And I wrote that with handlebars template. It's awesome. It's like basically using handlebars to build like Rails views, essentially, except it's my Ember view.
And you never have to think.
I never thought about
what state is where is like the user in the lifecycle of this application? Is it server rendered, client rendered? It just none of that matters.
Yeah. It's amazing. Have you gotten the cache viewer to show HTML yet, by the way? So no.
Yeah. Yes, but I changed our caching strategy and I finished it like the other night at like 11 p.m.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm not deploying this until 11 p.m.
Wait, so you did get it working. So for anyone listening, for listeners, why don't you just do a quick rundown of what's going on?
So there's so much.
Quick.
So yeah, there's so much. So
we use Node to render FastBoot apps and cache the resulting HTML and store it in Redis. But we're using Node to put that string into Redis, and by default, Node stores strings as.
No, I was using like a Node caching library, and it just the way that it got the response that you were sending down to the browser and storing it. It was combining like a string with a binary buffer. And then the way you got access to that was like, these were all like implementation details of the caching library.
Yeah.
And I realized like our caching strategy isn't that hard.
Yeah.
Our caching strategy is just if FastBoot gives you a 200, cache that response.
Yeah.
So I was able to rewrite that. It's
Oh,
like
okay.
100 lines of
Cool.
Node code.
You love hacking Node. It's like a new world for you.
It's
10 years of Rails development. Now you feel like you're free. You
finally free. It's like
you hate yourself and love yourself at the same time.
That is so true. That is the best way to describe it. You're just like flying.
And you're
just
like,
know that like
this code is not going to last
Yeah.
me 2 months. So you built something into EmberMap's UI that lets us look at our cache. So
Yeah.
I can go to embermap.com as an admin, you and I can, and we can visit and we can view the cache.
Yes, we can pull up the cache and we can see the cache for different roles. So what does the cache look like for a subscriber? What does it look like for a user? There's actually a problem I'm running into where you view the cache and it's like a payload from FastBoot. So if you start viewing that in a browser, the Ember app is gonna like start running.
Oh.
so I.
Oh, because you iframed it?
Yeah, because you're gonna
and
iframe
it's gonna actually read in like head with all the scripts and everything.
And so you see the cache for like an anonymous user, but then the Ember app starts running in your browser.
Oh my gosh.
And you're an admin, and so it starts repainting the page as an admin. So this is what I'm working on
that's
next.
funny.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do something. This is actually like
It's really funny.
I want to have a thing you set, like a global, like window dot.
Can you just strip the source tags?
Yeah,
script tags
you could, but.
Okay, what's the
Let me
other
tell
way?
you.
Yeah.
I want to have a window thing that just tells FastBoot not to take over.
And tells Ember not to take over.
Exactly. It tells Ember not to take
defer
over.
readiness.
Exactly. Defer readiness and just let that sit forever.
Promise. Yeah.
And this is going to be helpful for debugging FastBoot responses. So I could like flip that thing on, and then I could just visit, like in development mode, visit my site in FastBoot. And just never have the Ember app take over. Because
cool.
that lets me inspect the HTML, see what's coming out of FastBoot.
Okay.
So I was like, hey, this would have been helpful before, and then it'd also be helpful now, because a lot of times you like reload the page and you're just like, okay, it looks good, and the Ember app takes over.
Right.
But now so something.
That's cool. Now there would be other JavaScripts that would load, like if you were including like Google Maps and stuff. So you might want a mode where you strip out all JavaScript.
Strip out all the script tags.
Or if you could just, I don't know if there's anything that you can do that's like, don't run JavaScript. That doesn't involve you like going to settings of Chrome and disabling JavaScript. I guess you could do that, but
it would be nice if there was like a frame
part of the
option,
UI, yes.
like because you're iframing it. If there was like a Node.js.
Render this as a browser with Node.js or something like that. Yeah, iframe Node.js. Yeah, that's exactly what you want. Iframe with JS.
And then also too, you want to like overlay it
with modern web dev equals I hate, or
iframe blue links exactly. Iframe blue links equals true. There's some Rails developer out there now that's like, yes.
Yeah. Cool. That's pretty awesome. Well, get on that so we can inspect our cache values, make sure we're not serving people, because there has been a couple of times. There's some interesting things that happen.
FastBoot.
There are situations where FastBoot can respond with a 200 and malformed HTML.
Well, it can respond with 200 and a stack trace. So that's another thing that we have to. Dude, when I say that FastBoot is like
the best and worst technology,
when I say it's like halfway there, it's so great.
How does that happen? Let's just walk through this again. 200 with a stack trace. How is this possible?
You can get the malformed HTML, and I think you have to. I haven't done enough debugging here, but I think that FastBoot can render a stack trace, and then that thing starts going up back through Express, and Express is like, hey, it's a 200. No one's told me this thing is a 500.
Right, because it's an Ember app that's rendering a stack.
Yeah, it's rendering something.
And then, right.
So we have that happen. I was like, oh yeah, we'll just only cache 200s.
Little did
and then
you know.
like 3 days later, someone's like, hey, I'm getting a 500 request. 500 error response. I'm like,
Seems wrong.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right, I think with that we should wrap it. So thanks for joining us this week. Now, we didn't have time for questions this week, but we usually answer questions. And if you want to ask questions, you should come to Topic EmberMap on the Ember.js community Slack. That's where there's been more people in there asking questions lately, Tailwind questions and other stuff, which is cool. We've been railing on Tailwind enough that people were just like forcing people to use it just through sheer force of will, so that's kind of exciting. But if you have questions about anything, that's a great place to reach us. And
our private Slack.
If you're a subscriber, make sure you get into that. And we chat about all sorts of stuff in there. And you can always email us at info@embermap.com or send us a tweet. So if you have questions, we'll definitely make sure to do some Q&A next episode. And we will see you next week.